It's good news that the Thanksgiving weekend has been so strong, because those US carriers that are predominantly exposed to the domestic market have seen some softness in recent months. Traffic has not been keeping up with capacity growth. Seat factors have been going down. Fare levels have been a little bit softer, but international traffic has remained strong. And if we look at the earnings season largely over for European carriers, we've seen nothing but buoyancy in terms of demand in recent months. Of course, that's looking back on the summer, but the commentary we're getting looking forward has still been pretty positive. Nobody's really squealing any particular pain at the moment, but everybody's certainly watching, because the winter period, bar Thanksgiving and bar Christmas, is of course a weaker season anyway.
John, what we've seen from the European lens is that demand is outstripping supply. The airlines can't put enough aircraft in the air to meet the demand that's been there since COVID. Is that the same story in the United States as we talk about capacity?
Maybe not so much so in the domestic market, but certainly international. So the situation depends on which carrier. Carriers such as JetBlue and Spirit, which are far more domestically focused, have had a harder time. Those carriers who have sizable international long-haul networks as part of their portfolio, such as American, United and Delta, are seeing much more buoyant demand and sort of trying to mobilize more capacity in those markets. And of course, the European carriers themselves, that their relative share of long-haul flying, where demand is most buoyant, is much higher. But as you said, the challenge has been providing the right level of capacity. Capacity in many markets has been pretty tight, and it's going to stay that way, because we're seeing quite an unusual play out of this much talked about supply chain problems, by which I mean not only late deliveries of aircraft into fleets. Ryanair, for example, has talked about aircraft coming late, but we have certain aircraft types powered by Pratt & Whitney called GTF engines, which are facing massive groundings running into next year. Pratt & Whitney has indicated there could be 350 aircraft powered by this engine of the Airbus fleet type on the ground next year for maintenance inspections. And airlines such as Wizz Air, for example, indicating to expect 45 aircraft grounded from the early part of next year. So that's going to keep a really tight lid on capacity, which may or may not be a good thing depending on how demand pans out next year.
John, very good to see you. Look, I know I've been actually just going through as many low-cost airlines as I can find, from Wizz to Delta to JetBlue, you mentioned there, to Southwest to Ryanair. And one thing they all have in common, whichever side of the Atlantic they're on, is that their valuations are a massive discount to the S&P. Regardless of what the Thanksgiving travel looks like, regardless of what the bookings for 2024 like, why is this sector struggling with its valuation? Is it just that regardless of this growth in traffic, we're just not seeing profitability?
Well, it is a mixed picture, but profitability has certainly come through strongly, like airlines like Ryanair, as you'd expect, still leading the pack. They were profitable last year and are expecting to be profitable for the year currently in progress. But it does vary by carrier. You know, the supply chain factors are affecting different airlines to different levels. Wizz Air somewhat disappointed the market with their recent results. I think there is just a concern about what is going to happen with consumers. Is demand going to soften? But we were thinking this a year ago, and it still hasn't happened as yet. But I think it's a cautious approach. Last week, for example, we had IAG Investor Day, which I felt painted a pretty positive picture of the year ahead, but certainly many market analysts were not so favourably impressed at what they said.
Yeah, but I hear what you're saying and those concerns. But when I have concerns about Marks and Spencer's, I look at them and they're trading at 10 times forward. I have concerns about some of the biggest US retailers. They're trading at a premium to that. It's just, is there something intrinsic that our viewers need to know about this sector, that it will always trade, by and large, between 5 and 10 times forward, as opposed to indices which trade, between 2 and 3 times that level?
I think it's simply that the nature of the sector is one where it's not for the faint-hearted. People looking at it, analysing it, will take fright quite quickly. There are different factors that come along. There's so many uncertainties, of course, not least the geopolitical situation can throw carriers off in a matter of hours. Of course, the situation with the Israel-Gaza war, or indeed the ongoing Ukraine war, has had big impacts on traffic. Airlines, in the case of that, Israel have pulled flights out of that market. There's been talk of booking softness by some carriers in the wider Middle East region. And I think that this is the nature of the industry. I don't think the same would apply in, for example, retail, the same number of variable factors which could have a negative influence. Having said that, we've seen airline management really grappling incredibly successfully with getting out of COVID. As I mentioned, about tight capacities leading to very high revenues, fare levels are at record highs. Seat factors where capacity is tight are also incredibly high. So it is a positive picture. It doesn't make it any easier in terms of crystal ball gazing for next year to know exactly what will happen. But I would be pretty cautiously optimistic, however, to say we are looking at probably another strong year in the next 12 months.
John, can we talk about the fuel price? Because like the rest of the market, trying to judge where we're going from here, and there's been a narrative of fading demand taking place. The other is just how tight the Saudis are trying to keep the market in terms of supply. So what do you see in terms of hedging and how some of the airlines are positioned going into next year?
Well, again, it's a big sort of question as to what you actually do. I always say hedging is an art, not a science. Most airlines are pretty substantially hedged, and I think really the best approach philosophy is expressed by Ryanair, who talk about not trying to game the market, but just trying to get certainty. If you're fortunate and you get in at the right moment when the price is low, you could be in a stronger position relative to your competitors. Of course, the converse is true, but having certainty in your planning with one of the biggest budget items for an airline, I mean, broadly speaking, with fuel accounting for around about plus or minus 30% of costs currently, if at least you know what that cost is going to be in your planning period, you know what you could do with your capacity and what you can do with your pricing. But again, it does vary a lot by carrier. Wizz Air, we talked about their capacity challenges with the hit on engine groundings on their Airbus fleet. They didn't hedge until a few months ago. They took a strategic decision in 22, I think it was, not to hedge, and then got caught out when the price went up massively. They've come back in, but of course they had to hedge at relatively higher levels. So again, a mixed picture, but certainly the strongest carriers are still maintaining policies of being highly hedged, at least in Europe. Interestingly enough, US carriers tend not to hedge and just ride with what the market throws at them.